For week 7, we'll continue writing for success as students write their conclusion paragraph. This PowerPoint and presentation will discuss effective strategies for writing an essay conclusion. Before we begin writing, let's talk about run-on sentences. I understand this class again is not a basics of grammar class. However, in a means to be able to appropriately revise and edit your own writing when we get into that stage next week, you need to be able to recognize run-on sentences and further be able to correct those run-on sentences. Let's talk about recognizing run-on sentences. Here are some basic strategies to be able to recognize run-on sentences. One is you need to read each sentence aloud. Look for sentences that contain two complete thoughts without any punctuation to separate them. Last, it should be an indication that you have a run-on sentence if you have an especially long sentence without any punctuation to go inside of that sentence. Here are some examples, and try to be able to pause for a moment and describe where punctuation is likely needed. The library has a copy machine. It is very conveniently located. The Career Planning Center on campus is helpful. One of the counselors suggested I take a career planning course. My sister decided to wear black. I chose red. I plan to work in a daycare center. Some days taking care of my own kids is enough to make me question my career choice. In these particular examples, you should be able to find that, for one, there is more than one thought going on in that sentence, and some type of punctuation is needed. So you should be able to recognize that these are run-on sentences, and it's a grammatical issue. So now that we can recognize run-on sentences, what are some ways to be able to correct them? One way to be able to correct a run-on sentence is to be able to just create two separate sentences. Here's an example. Many students do not have a specific career goal. They do have some general career directions in mind. By being able to put a period at the end of goal and capitalizing the T in they, you should be able to have two separate sentences that both have an independent thought. These would actually be two separate simple sentences. A different way to be able to correct a run-on sentence is using a semicolon. Here's an example. Our psychology instructor is demanding. He expects the best from all of his students. So, after the word demanding, we know that some punctuation is needed. So let's put a semicolon there, and you can continue with the thought. He expects the best from all of his students. This is a way to be able to tell the reader that you have two independent thoughts, but they are related and yet in one sentence. Another way to be able to correct run-on sentences is using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Now remember, a coordinating conjunction is the fanboys acronym for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. This was a topic of discussion about 2 weeks ago. So here's an example of a run-on sentence and how to use and select a fanboys word with a comma to correct it. Interests change and develop throughout life. You may have a different set of interests 20 years from now. So in this example, you should be able to tell that after the word life, there needs to be some punctuation there. Now, technically, you probably could use a semicolon, but it's going to sound better if you have a comma after the word life, use the coordinating conjunction word of and then carry forward to join those two independent thoughts together. So let's read it with the fanboys word and a comma. Interests change and develop throughout life, comma, and you may have a different set of interests 20 years from now. That sounds much better than the run-on sentence before. A final way to be able to correct run-on sentences is to make one thought dependent. So previously we've talked about the words subordinating conjunction being at the very beginning of a sentence. And a subordinating conjunction is a prime indicator that your sentence is starting with a dependent clause. And so remember, if it starts with a dependent clause, it's going to be separated from the independent clause with a comma. So here, I actually rewrote a sentence using a subordinating conjunction to start it. It says, since students have some general career direction in mind, comma, they do not have a specific career goal when they initially attend college. So I've been able to use a subordinating conjunction and a comma to be able to correct the sentence. Honestly, I strongly advise students to either create two separate sentences, use a semicolon, or use a comma and a coordinating conjunction as a means to be able to correct run-on sentences. Having to recreate your entire sentence may be more of a chore, especially if you have your paragraphs with lots of run-on sentences. So inside of Blackboard, I've actually given you a practice paragraph. You have to locate and correct run-on sentences. So in this PowerPoint presentation, this is where you need to stop. You'll stop here, make corrections to the run-on sentences in the Microsoft Word document, and you will further turn in and submit that Microsoft Word document with the edits to the run-on sentences to my email. So again, let's get back into essay number 1. 2 weeks ago, we researched, generated ideas, and outlined and began writing about the topic of poverty. On our outline, we identified 3 main ideas for our body paragraphs. We also outlined the introduction. So our introduction had a grabber sentence, background information about the topic, and a really strong thesis statement that you have actually gone back and improved to make sure that you had a controlling idea for your entire essay. So here's the introduction that I wrote as a sample. Remember our body 1 paragraph, because last week you wrote body 1, 2, and 3, and that was to be submitted. And remember the pie structure that we used. I always think of a piece of pie, okay? You're only going to have 1 P, that's your point. That's your topic sentence. That's where you tell your reader what is the main idea about your topic that you're going to present in this body paragraph. You're going to introduce some information, and you're further going to explain the information that you brought in. What does it mean when you interpret it? And last, I've got to have a conclusion sentence. And so these are all the pieces that you worked on last week. So this week, you're going to focus on writing an essay conclusion. You're going to basically go back to your introduction very briefly. You're going to take your grabber sentence that you wrote, and you're going to reintroduce that grabber sentence and rewrite it using different words, because you want to bring your reader all the way back around to how they got interested in this entire essay in the first place. So I went back to my introduction, I rewrote my sentence, and here's an example. Poverty in the United States is a national tragedy that has afflicted suffering and undue hardship upon millions of children. Next, you'll summarize your essay's points in 2 to 3 sentences. You have to rephrase them in a way that shows how and why are they important. So your essay's points are your 3 main ideas, which comprise your body paragraph. All right? So I gave you a hint. Try restating the thesis with an emphasis on the main ideas that you presented. So here's my sample. The outcome of unemployed parents, hunger, and diminished resources for education have had long-term effects for children across the United States. Yet, the United States can alter these effects through extended support services meant to drastically improve opportunities for the entire family. The last piece for your writing an essay conclusion is that you need to provide some final thoughts or a recommendation to your reader about your essay. So here's a sample. Through the efforts of nonprofit organizations and the federal government, families can receive support through financial assistance, increased employment opportunities, and food aid, all of which will enhance the future outcome of our nation's children. So here is my entire conclusion paragraph. I've rewritten my grabber sentence. I brought my reader back in. I've summarized in 2 to 3 sentences the main points that I presented in my entire essay. And last, I left the reader with some final thoughts or a recommendation. You need to be able to give them some information that lets them know the importance of what they've just read. So what students are going to do is this week, alongside with a practice exercise that you stopped and already completed, you are also going to write your conclusion paragraph for me this week. You will submit that to me before the required due date.